The hardest part wasn't being told I didn't belong. It was watching my own sister nod along while they said it, her wine glass halfway to her lips, like she'd been waiting years for someone else to say what she'd always felt. But that came later. Let me back up. I was 31 the autumn my sister got engaged, and I'd spent the 4 years before that building something I almost never talked about. Not because it was a secret exactly, more because I'd learned what happens when you tell people. The air changes. They lean in a little or they lean back, and either way you've stopped being a person and started being a number with a dollar sign in front of it. What I did was simple to explain and impossible to make sound humble. I'd started a company. A small software thing at first, scheduling tools for home health agencies. The kind of business nobody dreams about as a kid, but it worked, and then it worked a lot, and by the time I'm telling you about, we'd been bought by a larger firm and I'd stayed on to run the division. The number that came out of all that was the kind of number that makes people treat you differently. So, I didn't tell people. I told them I worked in healthcare software, which was true. It just wasn't the whole shape of the thing. My sister knew. Sort of. She knew I did well. She didn't know how well, because we'd never been close in the way that invites that conversation, and our mother had passed when we were both in our 20s, and after that we drifted the way siblings do when the person who used to host Thanksgiving is gone and nobody steps up to take her place. So when she called to tell me she was engaged, I was genuinely happy, and when she said his family wanted to host an engagement dinner and would I come, I said yes before she'd finished the sentence. They're kind of formal, she warned me, his mom especially. Just be yourself, but, you know, the polished version. I let that one go. I've gotten good at letting things go. His name was the kind of name that came with a monogram already attached, and his parents lived 2 hours north in a town where the houses had names instead of numbers and the lawns looked like they'd been combed. I drove up alone on a Saturday in October, the trees doing that thing they do where the whole hillside looks like it's been set on fire in slow motion. And I'll admit, I felt good. Hopeful. I brought a bottle of wine I knew was nice without being a brag, and I'd worn a simple dress, nothing flashy, because the last thing I wanted was to walk in looking like I was trying to prove anything. I should have known from the driveway. There were 3 cars in it, all of them the kind that cost more than most people's first house, and I parked my 4-year-old SUV behind them, feeling, for the first time in a long time, like the help arriving for a shift. The mother answered the door. She had a beautiful smile and eyes that took inventory. I watched them go down my dress, my shoes, the bottle in my hand, and I watched something settle behind them. A verdict reached before I'd said a word. You must be the sister, she said. Not the sister of the bride, not a name, the sister, like a category. I am, I said, and held out the wine. Thank you so much for having me. The drive up was gorgeous. Oh, you didn't have to. She took it, glanced at the label the way you glance at a receipt, and set it on a side table where, I'd find out later, it stayed all night. They served their own. Inside, the house was enormous and cold in the way expensive houses can be, all hard surfaces and arranged objects. My sister was already there, glued to the fiancé's side, and when she saw me, her face did something complicated, relief and warning at the same time. She hugged me too hard. Be cool, she whispered into my ear. Please. I didn't know yet what I was supposed to be cool about. I found out fast. There were maybe a dozen people there, the fiancé's family, and a few of what the mother called our oldest friends. And the introductions went around the room like a deposition. Everyone had a title. This one was a cardiologist. That one sat on 3 boards. The father had a law practice with his name on the door and the name of his father before him. When they got to me, my sister jumped in. This is my sister. She works in software, right? Healthcare software, I said. How nice, the mother said, in the tone you'd use for a child who's announced they want to be a fireman. Is that steady work? I imagine it must be hard to plan a future with something so up and down. I said it was steady enough, thank you. Someone laughed at something on the other side of the room, and the conversation moved on without me, the way water closes over a dropped stone. I'm not going to pretend it didn't sting. It did. But I'd felt that particular sting before, and I knew the trick to it, which is to get curious instead of hurt. So I stood there with my club soda and I watched. And what I watched was a family that had decided collectively and without discussion that I was the poor relation and had relaxed into the comfort of that decision. Dinner made it worse and clearer. The dining room had a long table set with more forks than any meal requires, and there was a seating arrangement, little cards and calligraphy, and mine put me at the very end, past the friends, next to an empty chair and a teenager who spent the entire meal under the table on his phone. My sister was up by the parents. Every few minutes she'd catch my eye and give me a small, pleading look that I came to understand meant don't. The father held court. He was the kind of man who tells stories where he's always the smartest person present, and the table laughed on cue. At one point he started in on what he called the trouble with young people today, which is a topic I've noticed wealthy older men can sustain indefinitely, and it turned, somehow, to the subject of ambition. You either build something in this life or you don't, he said, swirling his glass. Some people are builders. Most people just work. Punch the clock. Nothing wrong with it. He glanced down the table, right at me, and smiled. Somebody's got to. Right at me and smiled. Somebody's got to. A few people laughed. My sister stared at her plate. The mother picked it up from there, gentler, which was almost worse. She leaned toward me down the length of the table and asked, in a voice pitched for everyone to hear, "And do you own, dear, or do you rent? In the city, I mean. It's so impossible for young people now." "I own," I said. "Oh, good for you." Like I'd reported a small personal triumph, like I'd learned to ride a bike. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. The thing I want you to sit with for a second. None of them were screaming at me. Nobody called me a name. If you'd recorded the audio and played it back, it would have sounded almost pleasant. The cruelty was all in the assumptions, the little kindnesses extended downward, the relief of having someone at the table they could feel comfortably above. And I realized, somewhere around the second course, that this wasn't about me at all. They didn't know me. They'd looked at a 4-year-old car in a department store dress and a vague job title and they'd filled in the rest, the way you'd fill in a coloring book. And now they were enjoying the picture they'd drawn. So I made a decision. I decided to find out exactly how far they'd take it. I started asking questions. Sweet, dumb-seeming questions. I asked the cardiologist about her work and let her explain things to me slowly. I asked the father about his firm and watched him expand like a parade balloon. I asked the mother about the house, the renovation, the decorator, and I nodded and said, "Wow, a lot." And I watched all of them grow more and more relaxed, more and more themselves, because nothing relaxes a certain kind of person like the presence of someone they've decided is beneath them. And they kept handing me things, not as a kindness, as a station. "Would you mind helping clear?" the mother asked me after the main course, not asking anyone else, and I said, "Of course," and stacked plates while the cardiologist and the board member stayed seated. In the kitchen, the mother found me and said warmly, "You're so capable. It's lovely. Some girls these days don't know how to be useful." I thanked her. I rinsed a plate. I filed it away. It was the father who finally pushed past my limit, and he did it talking about my sister. We'd moved back to the living room, coffee and a dessert nobody touched, and the engagement was the official subject again. The father raised his cup and said some words about welcoming a new daughter, and then he added, with a fond chuckle, that he was glad his son had found a girl with the right values, because I think about that wine bottle more than I should. The one I carried up to that house with both hands, the one nobody opened, the one that sat on a side table all night like proof of how little I was worth to them. For a long time I told myself the lesson of that dinner was about other people, about my sister's new in-laws and their cold, beautiful house. But the older I get, the more I understand that the real test was never theirs, it was mine. Here's the chain of it, plain as I can lay it down. They saw an old car and a simple dress and a job they didn't respect, and they decided I was nothing, and because they decided that, they let me see exactly who they were. None of it was an accident. People always show you the truth when they think you can't do anything for them. My sister laughed because she was scared, and her fear had a cause too. The same one I carried, the years we spent watching our mother be treated like furniture in rooms just like that one. Everything that happened that night was an effect of something planted long before any of us sat down to eat. What I keep coming back to is that the money never fixed a thing. The second they learned the number, Their warmth came rushing in, and it felt worse than the cruelty had, because it proved the warmth had never been for a person at all. If I'd built my whole sense of worth on their approval, I'd have spent the rest of my life chasing a respect that turns on a dime. So I want to tell you what I think actually matters. The 3 things I'd hand my own kids someday if I had them. The first is the simple decency of treating the waiter and the CEO with the same eyes, the way my mother could read a family in 30 seconds by how they spoke to the woman cleaning their floors. The second is the clear-headedness to see people as they are instead of as the picture you painted of them, because almost every wound at that table came from someone filling in a story they never bothered to check. And the third is the quiet toughness it takes to sit still while you're being underestimated, to stay calm, to keep your voice level, and to choose your moment instead of letting your hurt choose it for you. I didn't win anything that night. My sister did, eventually, when she sat in my kitchen and let her own face come apart and said she didn't want to be the kind of person who has to know the number first. That was the only victory in the whole story, and it didn't belong to me. It belonged to her because she did the hardest thing a person can do, which is look straight at the worst version of herself and decide not to stay there. Watch how you treat the ones who can do nothing for you. That's the whole exam. Most of us are taking it right now and don't even know we're being graded.